Hey Wildcats, Mr. Moran here. And in social studies, you folks have been learning about culture and the many different aspects of culture and how culture is all around us. But if you remember, there was one little sliver of that where we talked about government, or we learned about government as being a reflection of culture. And now we're moving from the general idea of culture to different kinds of governments. And in the United States, we have a culture of government that is a representative democracy, that is ingrained in our society. Democracy is such a part of our society that in schools we use it all the time. But in some cultures that's not the case because that is not their culture to model democracy in their schools. Some cultures it might be a theocracy. In some cultures it might be autocracy or dictatorship. Now what do those terms mean? Some of you might or might not know what those terms mean, but they're forms of government. And today we are going to learn about the kinds of governments where there's very few people in power. Part 2, we're going to focus on kinds of governments where there are more people in power. So I'm going to read along, and I'd like for you to read along with me on this handout so we can learn about the different types of governments where there's very few people in power. So I'm going to start at the very top where it says throughout world history. So throughout world history and currently in the world, there are many different types of governments. But no matter what kind of government, there is always someone or certain groups of people who are in charge. By the time you complete this assignment, you will describe the characteristics of the different forms of autocratic governments in the world. Things to consider when reading this assignment. So as you're reading along, try to think of these questions, have them back in your mind, and this gives you your meaning for reading. Know the definitions of governments. Hint, they're in bold words. Who is in charge? How does power change hands? What are some of the modern examples of these governments? So beginning here with few in power. An autocracy is a government in which one person has all the power. There are two main types of autocracy. There's a monarchy and a dictatorship. In a monarchy, a king or queen rules the country. The king or queen is known as a monarch. A monarch usually comes to power through their family line, meaning it's inherited. This means the king or queen's oldest child or oldest male becomes the next ruler when the current king or queen dies. In some monarchies, especially those in historical times, the monarch held all the power and had the final say over the government. In some cases, the king's or queen's word is the law, and they can never break the law because just them speaking becomes law. This kind of government is known as an absolute monarchy, since the king or queen has absolute power. So that means the king could just decide one day and say, hey, you know what? I don't like you for whatever reason, and I want you executed. It's done because they have absolute power. But even today, there are few absolute monarchies that are still existing. The tiny Middle East nation of Qatar is an example of a modern absolute monarchy. In some places in the world today, monarchs usually share power with other parts of government. Often the king and their family are subjected to the country's constitution, and their power is limited. This type of government is known as a constitutional monarchy. Cambodia is just one example of a modern-day constitutional monarchy. So is Great Britain, where there is the Queen of England, right? But she has to obey the Constitution. She does not rule like an absolute monarch. A dictatorship, someone known as an authoritarian government, or sometimes known as authoritarian government, is a form of government where one leader has absolute control over the citizens' lives. If there is a constitution, the dictator has control over that too. So the Constitution does not mean much. Although other parts of government may exist, such as courts or lawmaking body, these branches always do what the dictator wants them to do. And most importantly, in a dictatorship, the people are to serve the government, and the people have very little rights. One example of a modern example of a dictatorship is Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. And again, I can't emphasize this. In a dictatorship, the people do not have any rights. The people truly live for the government. And so therefore, in a dictatorship, if it would benefit the dictatorship if certain people were to die, that's okay in a dictatorship. What are the differences? A dictatorship and a monarchy might sound similar, but there are some distinctions between the two forms of government. How the rulers get to power and the titles they hold. In a monarchy, the power of the rulers typically pass along to a relative along the king or after the king or queen dies. So that's in a monarch. It's inherited. In a dictatorship, the dictator gains control through military force or the manipulation of an election. So it's not because their father was a ruler or their mother was the queen. It's power that they've taken. Also, usually a dictator will hold the title of a chairman, a leader, or they will even call themselves a president, even though they are not a president as the way we think of a president in the United States. Adolf Hitler was known as Der Führer, which is German for the leader. But a monarch will hold the title of a king, a queen, emperor, or some other royal title. Dictators will almost never hold royal titles. Now, there is one other kind of government. Well, it's not really government. It's called anarchy. Anarchy is when nobody is in control and everybody is in control at the same time, depending on how you look at it. Sometimes the word anarchy is used to refer to an out-of-control mob. When it comes to a style of government, anarchy is the only way to describe the human state of existence before any government is developed. So, in other words, there is no government. Everybody has power, and it would be similar to the way animals lived in the wild, with everyone looking out for themselves. Therefore, the strongest wield power over the weak. Today, people who call themselves anarchists usually believe that people should be allowed to freely associate together without being subject to any nation or government. Since anarchy does not allow people to live in safe and stable existence, there are no countries which anarchy exists. This is not a stable form of government. So people talk about anarchy, and it sounds like it'd be really nice because it'd be awesome where you wouldn't have government telling you what you can or cannot do. But because you don't have government with rules, usually what happens is the bullies start taking things over. So that would mean you're so busy just trying to protect yourself, you can't do anything else but to protect yourself and to protect your family. So we've got some links there if you want to learn more about different kinds of governments. You can click on that. And then we have Check for Understanding. Don't forget to complete that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask your teachers. Talk to you later. Bye.